Just a quick look at how I close read and the kinds of thought processes for just a short section of this, and I'll come back and do another one, and I'll just keep doing these. So the title of this is Skim Reading is the New Normal. You can read that. The effect on society is profound. It's kind of unusual to see a period in a headline. But for me, it says, well, what do they mean by skim reading? What do they mean by that? And if there's a new normal, then there's an old normal, right? What's the old normal? Maybe deep reading? I don't know. The effect, and they're going to claim an effect here. Like something happens because of skim reading leads to something, to some X factor. Okay? And the whole article is going to be about proving that. And then, of course, it's always a good idea to look at the title, the author of the piece. Right? That's just the beginning. This is actually a summary. It's a very broad summary. It doesn't really tell us a whole lot, except at the end it does say we need a new literacy for the digital age. So most of y'all were still born in the 20th century. It'll be in a couple of years, everybody will have been born in the 21st century. It's a whole new world. Okay, I'll be back. All right, here's the second attempt at close reading here. You can close read pictures. Like this one here. Here's a wind-up key. What's being wound up? And these are brain hemispheres. I guess that's the brain being wound up. How much do you wind it up? It doesn't say. This is kind of looks pretty robotic. Is this you? Here's the material that's being read on a desk, not being looked at yet. So what they say down here, let's make this a little bigger. It says, we need a biliterate reading brain. Sebastian Thibault's the author, the artist who did that. I have to look him up, check him out. Okay, so what they do is they advise you to look around on your next plane trip. I just did a plane trip, and I had an experience similar to here about the iPad as a new pacifier. So we've got a new pacifier and new normal. Okay, so I'm cueing into that word new. The author starts with a story, then tells about younger age school children, and if you have nieces and nephews, if you remember what it's like, or brothers and sisters who are younger, they read stuff on smartphones all the time. It says older boys don't read at all. I don't know how fair that is, but yeah, he said it anyway. Parents read on, so everybody is just on. Okay, we've got iPads. Let's change the color. Let's change to red. And let's change this to this. Okay. So we've got iPads, smartphones, video games, Kindles, email, news feeds. I suspect that is the new normal. And they say that in order, this is the sentence they're leading to right here. Unbeknownst to most of us, an invisible game-changing transformation links everyone in this picture. So these are all linked together. And what's the link? What's the secret that sits in the middle and knows? What is it? It's the neuronal circuit, that's brain talk there, that underlies the brain's ability to read is changing. Skim. And it has implications, so it's repeating the title of the thing again. And what are the implications? It has consequences. From pre-reading toddler to expert adult. So this isn't just picking on kids. It's not just picking on millennials. It's not just an old man on the porch shouting, screaming, get off my virtual lawn, okay? Back to you in a few minutes. Okay, in the next paragraph, we get this idea here as work in neuroscience indicates. Okay, that means that's they say, just like our textbook talks about. They say. This is what they say. What the experts say is that when we learned to read, when we created alphabets, we needed to create a new circuit in our brains. And this happened about 6,000 years ago. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, because it's what the experts say, but I'm just going to let that go for the moment. And in a close read, sometimes that's what you got to do. You just got to mark it and say, come back to it. That circuit evolved, and then it tells you how the circuit evolved. It didn't just start out with fancy reading like this. It started out with something very simple, like numbers, how many goats you have. To the present day where you're reading stuff like this, which is very sophisticated reading indeed. A college reading is very sophisticated reading. This is my research. So I think what that means is that this author has done research, him or herself. I can't remember the author, whether this author's male or female, it doesn't matter. What this person's research indicates is that what has evolved from the reading brain are some pretty important processes. And he calls them intellectual. That means like reasoning. And affective. That means, if you don't know what these mean, you need to look them up. Affective is emotion. Okay? So it goes through a list of items that are intellectual first, analogical reasoning and inference. And then you have, we'll just mark these as red, emotional things like perspective taking and empathy. In other words, standing in somebody else's shoes or just standing in a different perspective. And internalized knowledge is just stuff that you know. It's the stuff that you know from experience. And then back to the intellectual processes. You've got critical analysis and insight. So he tells you these are the things that have developed from literacy, and then it goes back to research, and what research surfacing in other parts of the world, that's they say, now cautions that these deep reading processes, the stuff, deep reading, that's the stuff that led us to this stuff. They're under threat. Now, I don't know, maybe I should mark that yellow. Under threat. Owl. But that's a claim that they're making. And they're under threat from what? Well, Digital-based modes of reading. What does that mean? Like I'm doing right now. I'm reading this digitally. So that is threatening all these other things in intellectual and affective processes, internalized knowledge, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Now, I'm going a lot slower with this, but that's what close reading is all about, is slow reading. We'll continue. It's interesting how important images are, and this is no exception here. A person bathed in blue light, I'm assuming before they go to bed. And the caption says, there's an old rule in neuroscience that does not alter with age. Use it or lose it. Okay, so that's a classic example of, they say, what do they say? Well, the old folks have always said, use it or lose it. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. If you're not acquainted with computer science at all, the first word that might throw you here is binary. And in binary code, you have zeros and ones. And everything is expressed through zeros and ones because transistors have on and off. So that's why quantum computing is becoming so big right now, is because there's more than one state. There's more than two states. But anyway, the author says this is not a simple binary issue. So the 0 here would be print, and the 1 would be digital. All right, so it's not just a simple matter of print versus digital reading. And it's not just a simple matter of an innovation, a new technical innovation. Another, they say here, he calls on the expert Sherry Turkle, who says, which I think is a very wise thing on first impression, we don't make mistakes, we don't err when we innovate, but rather, and that's the key word right there, but when we ignore what we disrupt or diminish while innovating. So this is the kind of thing I like to put in my own words. And you should too. You've got a pretty good idea. This is a fairly smart thing to say. It's not the innovation that causes the problems. It is the consequences of the innovation. What happens? And, this whole article is about what the consequences are to innovation. What are the consequences? Well, digital reading is causing us to, and then she's going to explain a little bit later. She calls it, and I'm going to switch because I think this is fairly important. She calls it a hinge moment. And a hinge, here's a hinge right here. Right here. And that's the moment, right? That's our hinge moment right there. And print is on this side, and digital is on this side. This is what close reading is about. It's kind of imagining things forth, maybe drawing a picture if it helps. The author says that we need to confront what is just diminishing in this circuit. She keeps calling it a circuit, which is, I think, is a good metaphor. I'm not sure if it's useful in the long run, but we'll take it for right now. So there's a circuit. Typically a circuit has a couple of different parts, right? And when you close the switch, the circuit is closed. Just to pause here to think about what's, and I'm kind of reading this as I go, what our children and older students are not developing. We need to think about, if you're a digital reader, what are you not developing? And the same is true of analog. If analog is as well, then what are we losing by not developing digital? So the angry old guy on the porch screaming and yelling about the digital culture, Well, what's he missing? Just like the millennials on the other side yelling at the old man, saying, "Well, look what you know," and what are the millennials missing? So here's a we right here. Starts just what do we know about the research? One thing is that, if I can switch here to green again, that reading is not genetic. It's not like vision or language. So vision and language are genetic. Learning to walk is genetic, thank God. Learning to read, not genetic. Learning to write, not genetic. So what we need is an environment. It needs an environment to develop. And we pass it on socially. It's like memes. It's a cultural thing. Then it says it. Something you got to go back and see what it's referring to. What does it mean by it? Well, it's the reading circuit. The reading circuit will adapt to the environment. And whatever that means. Different writing systems, mediums. And here's his argument here. If the dominant medium in the culture is fast and multitask oriented and well suited for information like digital stuff is, so will the reading circuit. So you have one dominant medium creates the circuit. That's the argument here. And once again you get another they say right here. UCLA psychologist. Right? So it flips back and forth between I say and they say. So, you can use these templates as a way to analyze or break down the reading. The result of this dominant medium in the circuit it creates is this: less attention and time to slower, time-demanding deep reading processes like we talked about earlier: inference, critical analysis, and empathy. Indispensable to learning at any age. So we're giving up something here. Sometimes close reading can help you to understand how a writer works. And here's an example of this. Up here we talk about what they say, what this psychologist says about how less attention and time will be given to slow, deep reading processes. And down here, it goes on to say, and this is what other people say. Again, they say, increasing reports from educators and researchers. And then there's an example. Here's Mark Edmondson. We should be, what he says is we should be less concerned with students' cognitive impatience than by what may underlie it. And again, that is kind of what the original thesis was. And so I'm kind of going back and thinking about what they're trying to prove here and how this is organized. So if you use the they say, I say template, then it's easier to see sometimes. And the big problem is that there are large numbers of students who can't deal with critical analysis sufficient to understand complexity of thought and argument. In other words, can't do college reading, which is just shorthand for saying complex reading. But it's not just literature in science in college, but it's also wills, contracts, public referendum questions in the voting booth. This is not just this is a global problem.